Hello, I'm Jack Klugh, producer of the Veterans in Your Corner podcast. Thank you for listening and watching our inaugural episode. Our host, Chaplain Jack Klugh, will be alone in studio today, giving you some background into his experience, his heart for veterans, and what you can expect from this podcast moving forward. I hope that you will forgive our shortcomings in the beginning and will return each episode to listen and be encouraged by the stories and wisdom from the veterans and active members of the military that will join us each episode. Thank you, and here's Chaplain Klugh.
I want to do something about people feeling the only solution that they have in life is to kill themselves. The only solution they have in life is to leave their family. The only solution that they have in life is to quit their job and not try anymore. I always over-prepare for everything I ever do. Because we can quit anytime, I say don't quit today. I wanted to do a podcast of something that burns in me. And I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and he says, Jack, focus on something that embraces your experience. And so that's what I'm going to try to do. And one of the things that I believe is very important is taking care of those people who have taken care of us. And the title of our podcast, we're calling it In Your Corner, because I think there's a lot of people out there that need someone in their corner. What I really want to focus on is being in the corner for veterans or those people who have served in our country. I'm an Air Force veteran. I'm an Army veteran. My brother-in-law in Texas is a graduate of West Point. My father-in-law was 30 years in the Air Force. My brother was in the Army. His wife was in the Army. One of my other brothers was in the Navy, and one of his sons is currently in the Navy. In our family, we go back, we have a relative who was a chaplain during the Civil War. I have his diary. And so a friend of mine was saying, Jack, why would you talk about anything else? Talk about that. There's many stories there that people can learn and benefit from. So that's what I want to do. When we're in someone's corner, that means we're on their side. We're not fighting their battle for them, but we're there for them when they're in the battle. Sometimes we find ourselves in a tight corner, and I did a YouTube video a couple weeks ago, and I talked about going through the white water. That would be an example of being in a tight spot. And there's all kinds of tight spots, and there's all kinds of people, and there's all kinds of shapes and sizes. Some tight spots are dangerous and life-threatening. Others are just feelings of awkwardness and things like that. One of the things that's important to me that I think I want to address is being in the corner for military veterans, whether we're in the reserves, the Guard, or active duty. This is a big deal to me. One of the things I have here is thousands of veterans for the last 20 years have set aside their own personal dreams, ambitions, or goals so that they could serve their country and could protect and defend their homes and the homes of others. And when I think of protection, I'm thinking they're not just protecting our homes here stateside, but they're protecting the homes of people in the Middle East, in Central America, parts of Africa, many deployments throughout the world that most of the time it's going quietly and unassuming. One of the sad realities, and many people have heard these things, but it's worth repeating, approximately 22 veterans a day commit suicide. I know of several myself. I have a friend of mine that committed suicide after many years, and he battled depression and PTSD and out of Texas. And he was a good guy. He was a helicopter pilot. And he came back from Vietnam and had lots of injuries and pain. He never would talk about anything with me, even though I was an Army chaplain. He did not want to do that. I remember doing his funeral, and it was a sad time. I was glad to be a part of the funeral. I was glad to get connected to his wife. And so one of the things I want to do through this podcast is to connect veterans to other people. I've done a lot of reading in how that Americans are really connected, are really plugged in. And a lot of people say that they're connected. And I want to challenge that. We might be plugged in, but are we really connected? Are we really making contact? Are we really living life? Are we really walking with somebody? Are we really in someone's corner just because we're on Facebook or any of these things? And I would say, no, not really. I think we can say we have a lot of people that are plugged into us, but connection to me implies some kind of contact, some kind of willingness to enter my life and walk with me. I'm not looking for people to advise me and to tell me which way to turn and how to do things, but I'm looking for someone that I can rely on, that I can lean on, that I can turn on. And I'm hoping people that are listening to this would have 3 or 4, maybe 5 people that in a moment of crisis or in your tight spot that you could turn to them. Who would that be in your life? Do you have any idea? I've talked with thousands of veterans over the last 30 years. I was in the Army as a chaplain for 4.5 years. Prior to that, I was in the Air Force for 4 years. In the Air Force, I was in law enforcement. In the Air Force, in the Army, I was a chaplain. I expected to be there the rest of my life, and because it was a good fit. I never would have dreamed that I would be a chaplain. I never dreamed that I would be an officer. My father was a mechanic. My mom was a homemaker. My dad never made over $35,000 in his whole life. So I never had big dreams. And to me, when I graduated from officer basic school, graduated from seminary, here I find myself, I'm now a second lieutenant. I remember that day my wife and I, we decided to celebrate. The kids were little. They must have been in school. She and I went to Wendy's and we got what are those milkshakes called, Jack? Frosties. Yeah, we got 2 Frosties. I think it was about $1.50 for 2 of them back then. And we sat on the curb in the parking lot, and we just looked at my orders. It's second lieutenant, and it was my orders to show up for officer basic school in New Jersey. That was a life-changing experience for me. And then from that, I expected to be in the Army for the rest of my life. My first assignment was at Fort Sam Houston, and that's when I got an opportunity to work at the burn ward at Brooke Army Medical Center. Saw a lot of things there that I didn't even think existed in life, that many different ways in which people can be harmed or hurt in this world. And that one of the things, that's why I think prayer is so important, so we can pray for protection and God's grace. But while I was on that burn ward, I came across many paradoxes that caused me to think and challenge my faith. And I still think about today. And as we go through this podcast series, I want to talk about some of those things. I have seen husbands, I've seen wives, that they're also affected by the service of their loved one who's wearing the uniform. And there's been a lot done on that, a lot done on the support that dependent husbands, dependent wives, dependent children, the burdens that they carry. And they're different than the one who's serving on active duty. And I hope to be able to talk about both of those. One of the things we want to do is bring people in and interview them, find out what their experiences, and not just what their experiences were, but what impact did it have on them? How did it change their thinking about a lot of different things? How it changes their thinking about having dreams and ambitions and dealing with interruptions along the way. How to deal with setbacks when you have a dream and ambition, and all of a sudden you find yourself on the downside of a situation, and the people that you're walking with, they get to keep going forward. I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of veterans over the last 30 years, and not everybody gets to walk across the finish line in the same condition in which they started. I want to talk about that. I'm not interested in just giving religious platitudes and say, if we pray, everything will be okay. And it doesn't mean that I don't think that prayer is important. I just know that there's prayer, there's actions with my faith that are important to implement along the way, and I want to talk about those as we go. One of the things I also understand about veterans when it comes to veterans, and I'm thinking of veterans who have faith, veterans who don't claim a religious faith, veterans who would claim to be against religion, all of these things. I've talked with many different kinds of folks. And so when I'm talking about veteran, I'm thinking about all those men and women who are coming from all these different perspectives in their backgrounds. And so I'm not trying to just make life seem easy, and I'm not trying to complicate it. What I want to do on this podcast is talk with people who've had real life situations. Some of those situations have been healed and rectified and repaired, and some of them have not. I'm thinking of many, many men, many, many women that I've talked that they're still in the process of trying to put the pieces of everything back together. So this isn't going to be podcasts of just, this is what the Bible says about your situation, now go out and do it. I believe God understands the circumstances that we find ourselves faced with, and he will help see us through. And I want to be able to talk about that with people as well, but not just go to church, become a nice person, and everything will be okay. I'm not interested in doing anything like that. One of the things that really bothers me about veterans and returning is how easily Americans forget. Although I think right now in the last 5-10 years it's been improved a lot with recognizing veterans who are returning from a deployment. When I got out of the Air Force in the first time, people didn't even like you. I remember when I was flying overseas to Turkey, I was in uniform, and I had somebody come up to me and says, "Why are you in uniform?" And I said, well, I'm in the Air Force. He says, well, he was in the military too. He says, you're not supposed to wear a uniform when you're not off base. It's not good for you. It's not good for us. I didn't even know that, and back then I grew up during the anti-war movement and the demonstrations and anti-establishment and all that in the 60s and 70s. And it was very difficult. And so I remember going to Turkey, feeling like I'm already doing something wrong. I've talked with many men and women who've come back, and they don't feel the same way about their hometown that they left prior to their enlistment. And they're not the same person when they come back, the same dad. They're not the same wife. They're not the same husband. Something's different. Not in every case. But it's deployments, the military life, and what people experience during combat or in war or being in a war zone does change people. And so I want to help the people come back into civilian life. I remember one time when I was being treated at a VA for PTSD, I told my the psychologist, I said, this is really hard for me because talking to somebody who was never in the military, how could you understand my experience? And she says, well, Jack, when you were in the military, who trained you? And I said, well, other soldiers, other airmen. She said, why? Why would they train you? You were a civilian. Why would you need them to train you? I thought that was a ridiculous question. She was young enough to be one of my kids, and I thought that is such a ridiculous question. It says, because I'm in the military and they were going to train me to be in the military because they understand military life, military bearing, military customs and courtesies and all these things. She said, right. And she said, now you're a civilian and I'm a civilian and I'm going to help you. I'm going to help train. I'm going to help work with you to become a civilian again. And that made perfect sense to me. It may not make sense to you. But what really bothers me is how hard that journey back can be for some, and how hard it is on mothers or of the receiving family members, how hard it is for them. And I want to do something about that. I want to do something about people feeling that the only solution that they have in life is to kill themselves. The only solution they have in life is to leave their family. The only solution that they have in life is to quit their job and not try anymore. I want to do something about that. Even if we could only improve that by 5%, that would be a big difference. Other things I want to talk about and address is how to walk with God, or how to continue on in life when something didn't turn out well for you. How to move forward in life when you feel cheated, or you've had a major setback in your life and you weren't prepared for it. You didn't see it coming. It came out of your blind spot and it really just ran over you and then backed over you and then drove forward over you another time.
Do you think veterans respond and react differently to those things than a civilian?
I think they can. I think some people, and I think it depends on who they are and the kind of units that they were in. And that's, so I have a friend of mine who was an Army Ranger. I have other friends that were also in the Special Forces and stuff. They have a real go-get-'em attitude, overcome and adapt. And And so those are some people that can, might, because of their training, have more, what do I want to say, more psychic ability to muscle through something. But on the other hand, there are other people that find it very difficult to shake it off or to let something go. I also want people to know someone can be a veteran and have never been in combat, never been in a war zone, never shot a bullet. And one of the things I was reminded of the other day, for every one person that pulls the trigger, it takes 7 to support them. So I might be in the rear taking care of the stuff, as the Bible says, but I still play a role in making it possible for that person to go out there and be a trigger puller. And so I think you bring up a good point. There are people that seem to thrive in life, and they use all that military experience to help them in leadership and pushing forward. And there are others that, because of what happened to them, they're wounded and they never get over it. And we'll talk about those things as we go. There's another thing I want to do is try to close the distance between understanding the military culture and experience and the civilian culture and experience. So you take an 18, you've seen that thing in Rambo. I think it's First Blood. It's at the end of the movie, and he's sitting there in that blown up building, him and his colonel, and he says, when I was like 18, I was doing this and I was doing that, and I was leading men, and I knew how to do all this equipment. And now I come back to the States and I can't even get a job, and I have no responsibility. And I think that's due to the gap of understanding between one of my nephews. I believe he's coming out of the Navy soon. The talent that he brings to the table on day one is different than someone his same age who's not gone there. That's all I'm saying. It's just different. And it needs to be understood, valued, and respected. And I think people want to. I don't think that people, because my experience, I've traveled all over the country, my experience is that many Americans admire the American warrior, the American soldier, the American airman, sailor. And I want to celebrate that, and I want to be able to talk about that. And I'm also interested in being able to help civilian people understand some of the rank structure. So when someone comes in and says, I remember one time I was taking care of somebody at the VA that I worked at, and this guy was a command sergeant major, and he was in his 60s. He had retired from the military many years, 30 years prior to me meeting him. And he was angry, mad as a snake. And so the nurses called me over to talk with him. And the number one issue that he felt is that he was being disrespected because they weren't acknowledging the fact that he was a command sergeant major, and the role that he played in the Vietnam War. It meant nothing, because he would try to talk to the nursing staff about this, and these nurses, they're not to be blamed. They just didn't know.
Yeah.
And so out of that, I came up with this idea. I want to connect the dots and help people understand a little bit, so that when you meet a veteran, you can ask them some interesting questions that will draw out their story. They'll feel appreciated, and you'll feel appreciated because you understand a little bit more about what it means to serve in the military. Well, it's really interesting when I go to the VA for care, and I'm a very pro-VA guy, so nobody's going to find me beating up on the VA here. Although, like any healthcare system, it can improve, and they continually try to do that. I'm very grateful for them. But it's interesting when you go there, and you've seen these hats, Air Force, and they'll have these ribbons on it or something like that, or Army or Marine Corps. And I don't personally wear those as identifiers, and I just don't. I'm not that guy. But if I worked in a restaurant and they had all that, wear your bling or wear your fun pins, I wouldn't have any pins on my uniform. I'm just that kind of person. But you get all these stories. I was over there the other day with Mom, and we're listening to two guys talk about when they were in the Philippines together back in the 70s. They weren't together. They were there at different times in the 70s, and you'd have thought that they were 18, 19 years old again. They just came to life in a whole different way, which brings up another point. Not every military story is a story of sadness, brokenness, or pain. Some of them are great stories. I have a friend of mine who lives out in Washington. When he was down in Fort Bliss, he was involved in helping get food for orphanages and everything across the border in from El Paso. There's people, chaplains, and lots of soldiers that get involved in the health and welfare of the communities that they're in. And when I was in Turkey, a lot of it wasn't good, but I would say a lot of it was. And lots of good stories and lots of good experiences, lots of good encounters with the local population. And so we need to highlight that as well.
Yeah.
Because it's not all about, as some people say, shooting things and breaking things. It's more than that. Or it's not just that, that some people would want people to think about. But other things I want to talk about that need to be talked about that it helps reduce suicide, and that is spiritual pain, soul injury. There's lots of descriptions of this, moral injury and there's just ways in which I want to help educate people on how they can play a part in bringing some healing to a hurting veteran. And that would be good information for spouses and everything. But they're hurting in a different way. But I want, especially for people, I'm interested in reaching out to people and finding audiences of people who have been affected by war or violence. You heard that story one day in Sunday school. A bunch of 10-year-old boys are sitting in Sunday school, and the Sunday school teacher says, "What's small, has a long bushy tail, and lives in trees?" And the boys looked at each other. What's he talking about? Teacher says, "Come on, fellas. What's small, fuzzy, collects nuts, and hides in trees?" What's he talking about? No. The teacher finally said, "Okay, I'm going to ask you one more time. I need someone to answer me. What's small and fuzzy?" They're in Sunday school now. "What's small and furry, has a long bushy tail, collects nuts in the wintertime, and sleeps in trees?" The little boy takes a risk, sit from the back of the room, and he raises his hand, and very unsheepishly he says, "Sir, I think you're talking about a squirrel, but we're in Sunday school, so somehow the answer must be Jesus." You know, and so we're not going to just try to sum this up and making it seem like if we're just not going to come up with the Bible has an answer for that. The Bible has an answer for that. Although I see the scriptures as guiding me through whatever experience I have. But you're right. And some of the things that we might come across in terms of interviewing some of these men and women, or some things that might even leave me stumped, because I'm not the Bible answer man. If someone I've said for years, if someone wants to play Stump the Chaplain, that's easy. You can win with me every time because I don't play that game. If somebody really wants to enter into that low point in their life and they want to have some kind of pastoral perspective from a chaplain, that's the kind of person, that's the kind of thing that I'm prepared to do. I want to do this because I just know there's too many men or women that decide that this is done. They're done. They're not listening anymore. And you decide to end it with their life. And my thought to anybody out there that might even be considering that now, because we can quit anytime, I say don't quit today. I can quit anytime. Just don't quit today. Give me one more day. Contact me. We'll have ways to reach out. And there's lots of ministries out there that are reaching out to veterans, and I want to be one more. If nothing else, be able to direct somebody.